Biomechanics testing methods. First, we put markers on the subject's 6 major joints. These were made out of tape and created boxes so that they were easily digitized. After this, we created a 3-4-5 triangle. This was so that the camera was perfectly at 90 degrees to the subject and so that it was centered in the plane of motion. After this, we gave the participant a 1 meter ruler which they had to stand with so we could identify a scale. Now we had to alter shutter speed, as too fast a shutter speed would create darkness, making it hard to see, and too slow a shutter speed would create blurring on faster movements. After this, we filmed the performer walking and running across the camera's field of view several times so that we could get the best possible footage. These are the joints in the body and their more common names. The glenohumeral joint, more commonly known as the shoulder, which is a ball and socket joint, allowing for rotation, abduction and adduction. The humeroradial joint, known as the elbow, which is a hinge joint, allowing for flexion and extension to occur.
Distal radio-ulnar joint, more commonly known as the wrist, which is a gliding joint, which performs supination, pronation, flexion, extension, adduction and abduction. Coxal, more commonly known as the hip joint, which is a ball and socket joint, performs flexion, extension, adduction, abduction and hyperextension.
This is the tibiofemoral joint, also known as the knee. It is a hinge joint. This performs flexion and extension. Taloaxial joint, also known as the ankle. This is a hinge joint which performs plantar flexion and dorsiflexion.
And here we have a more easily identifiable version of this.
Stride parameters during gait. A stride is defined as the interval from one event on one limb until the same event on the same limb in the following contact. Usually an event such as the first instance of foot contact defines the beginning of a stride. A stride can be divided into steps. A step is a portion of the stride from an event occurring on one leg to the same event occurring on the opposite leg.
During the heel strike, the major phase that is used is the stance phase, as when he transitions from the heel strike to the toe-off phase. This is 60% of the gait cycle. This is an important point as it allows the foot to act as a shock absorber, as the weight of the body is placed on each foot during the step. The muscles that will play a major part during the heel strike are the sartorius and the rectus femoris. As the foot starts in the heel strike position, the ankle will need to go into the plantar flexion, so the main muscle that helps with this movement is the eccentric contraction of the tibius anterior. After this, the knee will transition into flexion. This allows the leg to be stretched out further to increase and decrease the length of the step, and the muscle that helps this is the contraction of the quadriceps. Flexion is caused by a contraction of the hamstrings, and the flexion in the hip is caused by the contraction of the rectus femoris. When the foot is flat, this allows the body to absorb the impact of the walk, which the foot has to go into pronation, as the hip moves into extension, which is caused by the contraction of the adductor magnus and the gluteus maximus. The knee then extends up to 15 to 20 degrees, while the ankle plantar flexion increases up to 10 to 15 degrees, as it allows the foot to be as flat as possible. The degree of the end joint may differ to Liam whilst he is walking. Heel off allows the weight of the person to be divided over the toes, which are the metatarsal heads, whilst the hip goes into a hyperextension as the body pushes up and forward, and then goes into flexion. The knee then becomes flexed as the ankle supinates and plantar flexors. Toe off. This is when the hip becomes less extended as the opposite legs start the process. The knee flexes to a 35 to 40 degree angle on plantar flexion, and the ankle increases to a 20 degree angle. The swinging phase of the foot, which occupies 40% of the movement, includes the early swing, mid-swing and late swing. During the early swing, the hip extends up to 10 degrees and then flexes due to the contraction of the hip muscles, with lateral rotation as the leg slightly raises. Mid-swing, the hip has to flex to a 30 degree angle, which is caused by the contraction of the adductors, and as the ankle is now in dorsiflex position, which is due to the contraction of the tibius anterior muscle. The knee flexes to a 60 degree angle because of the contraction of the sartorius muscle, but then has to extend an extra 30 degrees caused by the quadriceps muscles. Late swing phase begins with the hips being flexed to a 25 to 30 degree angle because of the locked position of the knee and the neutral position of the ankle.
Walking, the angle of the ankle is always low at every point. That is not the same, for the knee, hip and elbow angles are all very high. The knee and the hip angles are of 180 degrees, and this is going into hyperextension. There are 5 points that are measured. They are highest, lowest, heel strike, toe off and follow through for each of the 4 joints. The hip is the most consistent of the joints and moves the least. The most movement is in the knee and is shown by the difference in the highest and lowest angle. The highest value is still the hip, which is again of 180 degrees. This time the ankle is the joint with the largest change in angle, going from almost 0 degrees to over 80 degrees. The knee has actually moved less in general, and the elbow moves about the same amount, with the maximum angle being 160 degrees.
We put Liam on a treadmill and got him to run and walk 400 metres. After this, we got Liam to do a spirometry test, measuring how much air Liam could expel from his lungs over 60 seconds. His peak flow at rest and after each of the stints on the treadmill. We were trying to see if there were any difference in his resting values compared to his values during and after exercise. We also monitored his heart rate to monitor the changes during resting and exercise.
The subject's resting heart rate was 98 beats per minute. The average is usually 65 to 75 beats per minute. A reason why the subject's heart rate was this is because the heart rate can elevate to an extent even before doing an activity. This is because the body is preparing for exercise due to the adrenaline rushing around the body.
When walking 400 metres, we had the incline gradient set at 1% and the speed set to 3.6 km per hour. We recorded the heart rate at every minute it took to be completed. The heart rate averaged from 111 beats per minute to 118 beats per minute. Running the 400 metres, we had the incline gradient again set at 1%. This time the speed was set to 10.5 km per hour for the first 300 metres. Then it was felt it could be increased to 11 km per hour for the last 100 metres. The heart rate averaged from 162 beats per minute to 180 beats per minute.
The reason for this is there is a higher demand for oxygen in the muscles, as the respiratory system needs oxygen to produce ATP. The heart also beats faster as it needs to expel any carbon dioxide that is being created in the muscles.
The bronchus is a major air passage in the lungs which diverges from the trachea.
Larynx, a hollow muscular organ forming an air passage to the lungs and holding the vocal cords.
Epiglottis, a flap of cartilage behind the root of the tongue which is depressed during swallowing to cover the opening of the windpipe.
Expiration, the intercostal muscles and diaphragm relax, returning to their starting positions, which decrease the size of the thoracic cavity.
Sinuses, a hollow cavity in the skull.
Adenoids, a mass of enlarged lymphatic tissue between the back of the nose and the throat.
Tonsils, two small masses of lymphoid tissue in the throat, one on each side of the root of the tongue.
Pharynx, a passageway leading from the mouth or nose to the head of the esophagus and larynx.
Trachea, a pipe that connects the pharynx and larynx to the lungs.
Pleura, two layers of wall separated by pleural fluid.
Inspiration, diaphragm contracts and flattens out, contracting of the external intercostal muscles, which elevates the ribcage and thrusts the sternum forward.
This is a spirometry test. This measures the amount of air you can blow out in one forceful breath. It is also commonly used to diagnose lung conditions.
To carry out this test, you have to inhale fully so that your lungs are completely filled with air. After doing this, close your lips tightly around the mouthpiece and then exhale as quickly and as forcefully as you can. making sure you empty your lungs fully.
The spirometer measures a person's force vital capacity. The force vital capacity is the volume of air that can be blown out after a person's fully inspired. Force vital capacity is measured in litres and is the most basic manoeuvre in spirometry tests.
This is a peak flow test. It's used to help diagnose asthma, and it measures how fast you can blow air out of your lungs. While Liam is resting and walking, he is using his aerobic energy system. This is for the resynthesis of ATP in his body. The aerobic respiratory system is very efficient. However, the aerobic respiratory system is much longer than any other respiratory system, which means even though it produces more ATP, it is not as effective during anaerobic exercise and also completely shuts off. Instead, during anaerobic exercise, we start to use our lactic acid system and our creatine phosphate system. As the lactic acid system is used more, it produces more and more lactic acid, which is a waste product. This has a negative effect on our muscle contractions, as it denatures the enzymes in our muscles and also needs to be buffered.
Limitations to digitisation. Here are some of the limitations to digitisation. Labelling joints. The joints may not be labelled up correctly, and so this doesn't give us an accurate overall analysis. Clothing. When recording evidence for 2D analysis, it is best that the participant being recorded wears tight-fitting clothes. This is so that joints being analysed are labelled correctly and are not obstructed by baggy clothing. Shutter speed. The shutter speed controls the camera's shutter and how long it is opened for. Fast-moving objects need a higher shutter speed, for example 1/1000th when being recorded, because otherwise the footage is blurred and so it's hard to locate the joint points when digitising when the shutter speed is low. 2D. Using only 2D analysis means that we can't see all the planes of motion when recording, whereas if we were to use 3D analysis then we could see them all. Human error. Human error can occur when digitising if the points on the joints are not accurately clicked on and followed during the process.